My name is Almeda Joy. I am 84 years old and I am sitting right here in my favorite chair by the window. The same chair where I have sat for the last 30 years watching the maple tree in my front yard change with every season. That tree has seen everything. It has seen my children grow up. It has seen my husband Clifford come home from work tired but always smiling. It has seen birthday parties and holiday dinners, and it has seen me cry more times than I would like to admit. But nothing, and I mean nothing, that tree ever witnessed was quite like what happened the day my son Randall got married. I want to tell you this story because I think a lot of you out there might understand it. Some of you might have lived something just like it. And some of you might be living it right now as you listen to me talk. So pull up a chair, honey, because this is going to take a little while and I want to tell you every single detail so you understand exactly how it all happened and why. I live in a small town in Tennessee. Not one of those big fancy places you see on television. Just a quiet little town where everybody knows everybody and the church on the corner has been standing since before my grandmother was born. I grew up here, married here, raised my children here, and I plan to leave this world from right here in this house if the good Lord allows it. Clifford and I bought this house 47 years ago. We were young and broke and the roof had a leak and the porch steps were rotting, but we looked at each other and said this is our home, and we meant it. Clifford worked at the hardware store for 32 years. He was not a rich man, but he was a good man and a steady man, and he loved me and our children with everything he had. He passed away 4 years ago, and I still reach for his hand sometimes when I am falling asleep. That is the kind of love we had. I worked as a school librarian for 38 years. I retired when I was 72, and not because I wanted to, but because my knees started telling me they had carried enough books for one lifetime. I loved that job more than I can say. There is something so sacred about a child picking up a book for the first time and disappearing into it. I watched hundreds of children do that over the years, and every single time it felt like a little miracle to me. After I retired, I spent my days gardening and cooking and watching my grandchildren grow. And being there for my family in whatever way I could. My life was not glamorous, but it was full and it was mine, and I was grateful for every day of it. Now let me tell you about my children. I have two. My daughter Cheryl Joy, who is the most level-headed woman I have ever known in my life. She lives about 20 minutes from me, works as a nurse, has 2 teenagers who are just wonderful kids, and she checks on me every single day without fail. Then there is my son Randall Lee. Oh, Randall. Where do I even begin with Randall? He is my baby. He was born 3 weeks early and came into this world hollering, and he has been loud and full of energy ever since. He was the kind of boy who could charm anybody. Teachers loved him, neighbors loved him, the whole town knew Randall Lee and thought the world of him. He was smart too, got himself a good job as a project manager at a construction company, bought himself a nice house, drove a decent truck. I was proud of him. I am still proud of who he was. But somewhere along the way something changed. And that something had a name. That something was Cassidy Monroe. I want to be fair here because I am a woman of faith, and I do not like to speak badly about people without cause. But I also believe in telling the truth, and the truth is that from the very first moment I met Cassidy Monroe, something in my stomach told me to be careful. Now I did not listen to that feeling right away. I told myself I was just being a protective mother. I told myself that any woman Randall brought home I would probably find something wrong with, because no one is ever quite good enough for your child when you are a mama. So I pushed that feeling down and I smiled and I welcomed her and I tried. Lord knows I tried. Cassidy was 29 years old when Randall brought her home to meet us. Randall was 34 at the time. She was pretty, I will give her that. She had long blonde hair that she always wore in these perfect waves, big green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. She dressed well, always put together, always looked like she had just stepped out of one of those magazines. She worked as a real estate agent and she was good at her job from what I could tell, because she had a way of making you feel like she was your best friend within 5 minutes of meeting her. She was warm and charming and she laughed at all the right moments and said all the right things. On the surface she was everything you would want for your son. But I started noticing little things. Small things that by themselves would mean nothing, but when you put them all together they started to paint a picture. The first thing I noticed was how she was with Randall. She was sweet to him in public, always touching his arm, always laughing at his jokes, always looking at him like he was the most wonderful man in the world. But I am a sharp woman and I have been watching people my whole life, and I noticed that when she thought no one was looking, that warmth would just switch off. Like flipping a light switch. She would be in the middle of a big warm smile and then she would turn away and her face would just go flat. Empty. Like the smile was a costume she was wearing. The second thing I noticed was how she started working on Randall almost immediately. It was subtle at first. Little comments here and there. She would say things like, "Oh, Randall, you are so good to your family. I just hope they appreciate how much you do for them." Or she would say, "Your family is so lucky to have you. Do they ever tell you that?" At the time I thought she was just being complimentary. But looking back I understand now what she was doing. She was planting seeds. She was slowly, carefully, patiently planting the idea in Randall's mind that his family did not appreciate him enough. That he was giving more than he was receiving. That somehow we, his own family who had loved him his whole life, were taking him for granted. The third thing was how she handled my close friend Agnes Pearl. Agnes has been my neighbor and my dearest friend for over 40 years. She is sharper than a tack and she does not mince words, and she saw through Cassidy Monroe from day one. Agnes said to me one afternoon when we were sitting on my porch drinking sweet tea, "Almeda, that girl is performing." I asked her what she meant and she said, "She is performing the role of perfect girlfriend. Watch her eyes when she thinks nobody is looking." I started watching. Agnes was right. Cassidy noticed that Agnes was watching her, and from that point on she started making comments about Agnes too. She told Randall that she felt like Agnes was unfriendly toward her. She told him she felt unwelcome when Agnes was around. She was doing the same thing with Agnes that she was doing with us, trying to isolate Randall from the people who loved him and could see clearly what she was doing. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking, "Almeda, maybe you just did not like her and you are finding reasons to justify that." And I understand why you might think that. So let me tell you about the things she actually did, not just the feelings I had, the actual things she did that showed me exactly who she was. About 6 months after Randall started dating Cassidy, he stopped coming to Sunday dinners. Now Sunday dinner at my house has been a tradition since before Randall was born. Every Sunday the whole family comes over. I cook, Cheryl brings dessert, we sit around the table and we talk and we laugh and we catch up on each other's lives. It was the one constant in our family, the thing we always came back to no matter what was going on. Randall had never missed a Sunday dinner in his adult life, except for when he was traveling for work. Then suddenly he started missing them. First it was every other week. Then it was once a month. Then it was almost never. And every time I asked him about it he would say, "Oh Mama, I'm sorry, Cassidy had plans for us this weekend," or "Cassidy had this thing we had to go to." And I would say, "She could come too, she is always welcome." And he would get quiet. Then there was the money situation. Now I am not a nosy woman and I do not make it my business to know the details of my grown son's finances. But Cheryl works with a woman whose husband works at the same company as Randall, and word got back to us that Randall had taken out a significant loan not long after he started dating Cassidy. We did not know what for at the time. Later we found out it was because Cassidy had convinced him to invest in some kind of real estate venture that she was involved in. I do not know all the details, but what I do know is that Randall was financially comfortable before Cassidy, and within a year of dating her he was stretched thin. He stopped talking about buying that bigger truck he had always wanted. He stopped mentioning the vacation he had been planning to take. Small things, but I noticed. Then came the engagement. Randall called me on a Tuesday evening to tell me he was going to propose to Cassidy. I want to be clear that I did not say anything negative on that phone call. I told him I loved him and I wanted him to be happy, and that if Cassidy made him happy then I was happy for him. And I meant that. I genuinely meant it. But after I hung up the phone I sat in this very chair and I cried. Not because I did not want him to be happy, but because I was afraid. I was afraid of what I had been watching for the past year and a half. I was afraid of the Randall I had been seeing lately, quieter, more guarded, less like himself. I was afraid of what was coming. The engagement party was the first real sign of how things were going to go. Cassidy planned the whole thing herself without consulting anyone in our family. Which is fine, it is her engagement too. But she scheduled it on the same day as Cheryl's daughter's school play. A conflict that Cheryl had mentioned to Cassidy weeks before. Cheryl came to me upset about it, and I told her to talk to Cassidy directly and try to work it out. Cheryl did try. She called Cassidy and explained the conflict and asked if they could possibly move the date by just 1 week. Cassidy was very sweet on the phone apparently, said she completely understood and would talk to Randall about it. The date never changed. Cheryl had to choose between her daughter's play and her brother's engagement party, and she chose her daughter. Which any mother would do. And from that point on, Cassidy told everyone who would listen that Cheryl was unsupportive and jealous, and did not want her brother to be happy. Randall believed her. That was when the real trouble started between Randall and Cheryl. They had been close their whole lives. They had the kind of sibling relationship where they bickered and teased each other, but would defend each other to the death against anyone outside the family. Randall had been at Cheryl's side through her divorce 10 years ago. Cheryl had been at Randall's side through every job change and heartbreak and rough patch. They were not just siblings, they were friends, and Cassidy knew that. I believe she targeted that closeness deliberately because she understood that Cheryl saw through her. And as long as Randall and Cheryl were close, Cheryl would have influence over him. Over the next several months leading up to the wedding, the situation got worse and worse. Cassidy made the wedding planning a complete exercise in exclusion. She did not ask me to go dress shopping with her. She did not include Cheryl in any of the planning. She told Randall that she wanted a fresh start with a new family, meaning her own family, and that she hoped he understood. And Randall, my sweet foolish boy who was so deep in whatever spell she had cast on him, said he understood. He told me this himself over the phone one night. He said, "Mama, Cassidy just wants this day to be about starting our new life together, and I hope you can respect that." I asked him what that meant. He could not really explain it. He just kept saying he hoped I would be supportive. Agnes Pearl said to me around this time, "Almeda, that woman is not planning a wedding. She is planning a takeover." And I understood exactly what she meant. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late October. The venue was a nice barn-style event space about 40 miles from town. Cassidy's family was coming in from out of state, her parents and her 2 sisters and various cousins and friends. Our side of the family had been given a limited number of invitations compared to her side, which I thought was strange since we were the local family, and most of our people would be driving to get there anyway. But I did not make a fuss about it. I bought a beautiful dress, a deep burgundy color that Clifford always said looked lovely on me. And I got my hair done, and I told myself I was going to walk into that wedding with grace and love in my heart, and I was going to watch my son get married with a smile on my face no matter what. The week before the wedding, Randall called me. He sounded nervous and strange on the phone, and I asked him if everything was all right. He said yes, and then there was a long pause, and he said, "Mama, Cassidy and I have been talking, and we just want to make sure that the wedding day stays peaceful and drama-free." I said, "Of course I want that too." He said, "Well, Cassidy is worried that some family members might say things or cause a scene, and she just wants everyone to know that this is a happy day, and we need everyone to be on their best behavior." I asked him who he was referring to specifically, and he got quiet again and then said he was just talking generally. But I knew. He was talking about me and Cheryl and Agnes. Cassidy had convinced him that we were going to cause trouble at his wedding. I want you to understand how that felt. I want you to really sit with that for a moment. This is my son. I carried him in my body. I labored for 14 hours to bring him into this world. I stayed up with him through ear infections and nightmares and teenage heartbreaks. I worked 38 years so that I could help give him a good life. And here he was on the phone telling me, in the most polite way possible, that his bride was worried I might cause a scene at her wedding. I did not cry on that phone call. I thanked him for letting me know, and I told him I would see him Saturday, and I hung up, and then I sat in this chair and I did not move for a very long time. Cheryl called me that same evening. Cassidy had called her directly and told her that she was not invited to the wedding anymore. Just like that. Said that given the tension between them, she thought it would be better if Cheryl did not attend. Cheryl was stunned. She called Randall immediately, and he said he was sorry, but he had to support his soon-to-be wife's decision. Cheryl called me crying. I had not heard my daughter cry like that since her divorce. She kept saying, "Mama, he chose her over me. He actually chose her over me." And I did not know what to say to her because she was right. He had. Now here is where the wedding day nightmare truly begins. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed carefully. I put on my burgundy dress. I did my hair. I told myself I was going to be the bigger person. I was going to go to that wedding, and I was going to sit in my seat, and I was going to watch my son get married, and I was going to be grateful that he was alive and healthy and that I was still here to see it. Cheryl called me that morning and begged me not to go. She said, "Mama, they do not deserve your presence." She said, "Do not give them the satisfaction." I told her I was going because Randall was my son, and no bride was going to keep me from watching my child get married. Cheryl said she understood, and she would be waiting at home with food when I got back. Agnes Pearl offered to drive me since I do not drive long distances anymore. Agnes showed up at my door that morning in her best Sunday clothes. Her silver hair pinned up perfectly, looking every bit of her 81 years and just as sharp and dignified as ever. I loved that woman. We drove the 40 miles together mostly in silence with the radio playing old gospel songs softly in the background. When we arrived at the venue and parked, Agnes took my hand and said, "Almeda, hold your head up. You have done nothing wrong." I held my head up. The venue was beautiful, I will say that much. Cassidy had good taste in decor. There were white flowers everywhere and warm golden lights strung across the ceiling of the barn and round tables with cream-colored tablecloths and small pumpkins as centerpieces since it was October. Under different circumstances I would have found it genuinely lovely. We were directed to our seats by a young man in a black vest who smiled politely and handed us programs. Our seats were in the third row on the groom's side. I noticed immediately that Cassidy's family occupied the entire first 2 rows on both sides. Our family, what little of us had been invited, was scattered toward the back and middle. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap and I breathed. Agnes sat beside me and patted my hand once. The music started and the guests settled and the ceremony began. Randall walked out with the officiant and stood at the front of the aisle, and when I saw him in his suit, I felt that rush of love that only a mother knows. He looked so handsome and so grown, and for a moment all the hurt of the past months just fell away, and I was simply his mother watching her son stand at the altar, and I was so proud of him. Then Cassidy appeared at the back of the aisle. She was in a stunning white gown, fitted through the bodice and flowing out at the bottom, her blonde hair in an elegant updo with small white flowers pinned through it. She was on her father's arm and she was smiling and she looked beautiful. I will not take that from her. She was a beautiful bride. But when she reached the front and turned to face Randall and the ceremony began, I saw her eyes sweep across the crowd, and when they landed on me they paused for just a fraction of a second. And in that fraction of a second I saw something in those green eyes that was not warmth and was not joy. It was something calculating and satisfied. Like she was checking something off a list. The ceremony was proceeding normally. The vows were written by the couple themselves, which is common nowadays. Randall went first. His vows were sweet and genuine, and I could hear the love in his voice, and it made my heart ache because I knew that love was real, whatever else was going on. Then it was Cassidy's turn. She took a small paper from her bouquet and she began to read, and as she read I realized what she was doing. Her vows were beautiful on the surface. Romantic, poetic, all the right sentiments. But woven into them were these subtle declarations. She said things like, "I choose you over every other voice in my life. I choose our family, the one we are building, over the families we came from. I promise to be your home, your safe place, your only certainty. I promise that in our marriage we will protect each other from anyone who does not understand what we have." I am telling you, every person in that room with any sense heard exactly what she was saying. She was not just making wedding vows to my son. She was making a declaration to everyone present that Randall belonged to her now, and the rest of us were on the outside. Agnes squeezed my hand so hard under the pew that I almost said ouch. And then came the nightmare. Everything had been tense but holding together. The ceremony finished, they were pronounced husband and wife. Everyone clapped, the music played. We moved from the ceremony area into the reception space. Tables were set. A band was warming up in the corner. The bartenders were pouring drinks. I found my assigned seat at my table. I looked at the place cards and realized I had been seated with people I did not know at all. Not one family member at my table. Agnes was not even assigned to my table. She had been put at a different table on the other side of the room. I thought this was an oversight at first. I asked one of the wedding coordinators if there had been a mix-up with the seating. She checked her clipboard and said, "No ma'am, this is correct as assigned by the bride." I sat down. I was not going to make a scene. I introduced myself to the people at my table, some of Cassidy's work colleagues apparently, perfectly pleasant people who had no idea who I was. I smiled and I made small talk, and I watched my son across the room laughing and being photographed and doing the things that grooms do at receptions. He had not come over to say hello to me since we arrived. I had been there for over an hour and my son had not come to my table. Then the speeches began. The best man spoke, very funny and warm. Cassidy's sister spoke, very emotional and lovely. And then Cassidy's mother stood up. Now I want to be clear that I had never had a problem with Cassidy's mother before this night. She seemed like a reasonable woman. But what she said in that speech sent a chill through me that I still feel today. She talked about how happy she was that her daughter had found a man who understood that a marriage is its own world. She talked about how important it was for a couple to put their marriage first and to build walls around it to protect it from outside interference. She said, and I remember this very clearly, she said, when a man finds the right woman, he should be willing to walk away from anything that threatens their peace. And she looked directly at me when she said it. The room was not quiet, but something shifted in it. I saw a few people glance in my direction. I kept my face still. I kept my eyes forward. I did not give anyone at that table or in that room the satisfaction of seeing me react. After the speeches, when the dinner was being served, Randall finally came to my table. He crouched down beside my chair and he said, "Mama, are you okay?" I looked at him and I said, "Randall, I am fine." I said, "How are you?" He smiled and said he was wonderful and that the day was perfect. I looked at my son's face, that face I had known since the moment he was born, and I could see that he believed what he was saying. He believed the day was perfect. He had no idea what had just happened in that room because he had not been watching the same wedding I had been watching. He had been watching the fairy tale version. I was watching the other one. I took his hand and I said, "Randall, I love you." That is all I said. He looked a little confused by that, like he was expecting something else, and he said, "I love you too, Mama." And then someone called his name and he was gone again. About 40 minutes later, the situation that I had been bracing for since the moment I walked into that venue finally arrived. Cassidy's sister came to my table and very quietly informed me that the bride would like to speak with me. I looked at Agnes across the room and she was already watching me and she gave me a small nod. I followed Cassidy's sister to a small anteroom off the side of the main reception space. Cassidy was standing there with her arms crossed and her bouquet nowhere in sight and that wedding smile completely gone from her face. She said to me, "Almeda, I want to be honest with you tonight because I think we are past pretending." I said, "Go ahead." She said that she knew I did not approve of her, and that she knew I had been talking about her to Randall and trying to undermine their relationship. I said that was not true. She said she had evidence. I asked her what evidence. She pulled out her phone and she showed me a series of text messages that were supposedly from me to Randall. I looked at those messages and I felt the blood drain from my face. Not because they were from me. They were not from me. I had never sent those messages. The language was wrong, the phrasing was wrong, and some of the things said in those messages were things I would never say. But the name at the top of the messages said Mama. Someone had sent messages to Randall from a number saved under my name saying terrible things about Cassidy. I told Cassidy those messages were not from me. She looked at me with that flat expression I had seen so many times before when she thought no one was watching and she said, "Of course you would say that." I told her again very clearly I did not send those messages. I asked her to let me see the number they came from. She turned her phone away. I asked if Randall had seen these messages. She said Randall knew everything. I said I wanted to talk to Randall. She said tonight was not the time. I walked back out into the reception and I went directly to Randall. I did not care about scenes anymore, I cared about truth. I found him at the bar with some of his friends and I touched his arm and I said I needed to speak with him privately right now. He looked uncomfortable and he said, "Mama, this is not the time." I said, "Randall, your wife just showed me text messages that she says are from me, and they are not from me and I need you to look at that number right now." He looked around at his friends, embarrassed, and then he took me aside. He said he had already seen the messages months ago, and that it had hurt him deeply that I had said those things. I told him I had never sent those messages. He looked at me with something in his eyes that I had not seen since he was a teenager and I had caught him in a lie, that look of someone who wants to believe something other than the truth because the truth would require them to change everything. He said, "Mama, why would Cassidy make that up?" And I said, "Randall, I do not know. But I need you to check that phone number." He said he would look into it later. I said there might not be a later for this conversation and he said, "Please, Mama, not tonight." And he walked back to his friends. I went back to my table. Agnes came and sat beside me even though it was not her assigned seat, and she did not say a single word. She just sat there with me and that was enough. I ate what I could eat and I watched the dancing start and I watched my son dance with his new wife and I watched his face as he looked at her and I thought he loves her. He genuinely loves her. And that is the saddest part of this whole story. Not that he married her. Not even the terrible day I had just sat through. The saddest part is that he loves her and she knows exactly how to use that. Agnes and I left before the cake was cut. I did not say goodbye to Randall because he was dancing and I did not want to interrupt, and honestly I was not sure I could hold myself together through a goodbye. Agnes held my arm as we walked to the car, and the night air was cold and crisp the way October nights are in Tennessee, and the sky was full of stars. I looked up at those stars and I thought about Clifford. I thought about how he would have handled this. Clifford was a quiet man, but when he had something to say he said it with such clarity and such love that you could not argue with him. He would have pulled Randall aside long before it got to this point. I missed him so fiercely in that moment that I had to stop walking for a second and just breathe. Agnes drove me home without the radio this time. When she pulled into my driveway, she turned off the engine and she sat with me for a while. She said, "Almeda, you did everything right tonight." I said, "I know." She said, "That girl is going to show herself eventually. They always do." I said, "I know that too." She said, "Randall loves you." I said, "I know that more than anything." And she said, "Then hold on to that." Cheryl was at my house waiting just like she said she would be. She had made chicken soup and cornbread, and she had the lamp on in the living room so the house was warm and golden when I walked in. She took one look at my face and she opened her arms, and I walked into them like I was still a young woman who needed her mother. Except I was the mother and she was my child, and sometimes that is how love works. You take turns holding each other up. I told Cheryl everything. She listened without interrupting, which for Cheryl was a significant act of self-control. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time and then she said, "Mama, what do we do now?" And I thought about that question. What do we do now? Here is what I did. I did not stop loving my son. Not for one single day. I did not write him off. I did not declare him dead to me the way some mothers might have done in my position. Instead, I did what I have always done in hard situations. I got quiet and I got patient and I kept the door open. I made sure Randall knew, every time we spoke, which was not often at first, that I loved him and that my door was always open. I did not mention Cassidy unless he brought her up. I did not ask loaded questions. I did not try to plant seeds of doubt the way she had planted seeds in him about us. I just loved him. Plain and steady, the way I had loved him his whole life. Months passed. Randall and Cassidy settled into their married life, and we heard very little from him. Cheryl and I would talk on the phone and worry about him together. Agnes Pearl would check in on me and we would drink tea and talk about other things, and she would make me laugh and remind me that life was still good and full even in the hard parts. Then about 8 months after the wedding, something started shifting. Randall started calling a little more. At first the calls were short and surface level. "How are you, Mama? I am fine. How is the weather?" But then they got a little longer. He started asking about Cheryl. He started asking about Agnes. He started asking about the old neighbors and the church and the things he had grown up knowing. He was reaching back toward something. I could feel it. One Sunday afternoon, about 10 months after the wedding, Randall showed up at my door. No call ahead, no warning. Just his truck in my driveway and him standing on my porch with his hands in his pockets, looking like he was 12 years old and had just broken something and was trying to figure out how to tell me. I opened the door and I looked at him and I said, "Come in, I just made coffee." We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had done his homework for 12 years, and he wrapped his hands around his mug and he said, "Mama, I have to tell you something." He told me that the phone number on those text messages had been traced. He did not say how or by whom, but apparently someone had looked into it carefully enough to determine that the number was not mine and had never been mine. It was a number that had been active for only a short period of time and then deactivated. He sat there at my kitchen table and he told me this, and he could not quite look me in the eye. And I could see how much it was costing him to say it, because saying it meant admitting what it meant. It meant admitting that someone had created a fake number and sent fake messages designed to look like they were from me. And there was really only one person who had a motive to do that. I did not say "I told you so." I did not say "I knew it all along." I did not say anything about Cassidy at all. I just reached across the table and I covered his hands with mine and I said, "Randall, I love you." He looked up at me then and his eyes were red and he said, "Mama, I am so sorry." And I said, "I know you are, baby. I know you are." We sat there at that table for a long time. The coffee got cold. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor the way it does in October, golden and slanted and beautiful. And we talked, really talked the way we used to before Cassidy. He told me things had not been easy. He told me there had been arguments. He told me he had been trying to figure out what was real and what was not for a while now. I listened to all of it without judgment and without I told you SOS and without any kind of satisfaction because there is nothing satisfying about watching your child in pain. I did not tell him to leave Cassidy. That was not my place. What happened in his marriage was between him and Cassidy and whatever God had in store for them. What I told him was this. I told him that no matter what he decided and no matter what happened, I was his mother and this was his home and that door was always going to be open. I told him that Cheryl loved him and missed him. I told him that Agnes Pearl had asked about him just last week. I told him that this house still had his bedroom and his old books on the shelf, and that the maple tree in the front yard had grown another inch, and that none of that was ever going to change. He stayed for dinner. I made his favorite, pot roast with potatoes and carrots and those little rolls he has loved since he was a boy. I called Cheryl and she came over and the three of us sat around that table and it was not like nothing had happened because a great deal had happened and we all knew it. But it was like a beginning. Like the very first tender shoot of something growing back after a long winter. I will not tell you that everything was resolved that evening or in the weeks and months that followed because it was not. Randall and Cassidy's marriage went through a very difficult period. There were things I was not privy to and things Randall only told me in bits and pieces. What I can tell you is that Randall started showing up again. He started being my son again in the ways that mattered. He called more. He came by more. He and Cheryl worked slowly and carefully at rebuilding what had been broken between them. It took time and it was not always smooth, but it happened because they both wanted it to happen. As for Cassidy, I will say this. I do not know what is in her heart. I do not know her whole story or what made her the way she is. I know that she did things that hurt my family deeply. I know that she manipulated my son and tried to cut him off from the people who loved him. I know that those fake text messages were one of the cruelest things anyone has ever done to me personally. But I also know that holding hatred in your heart at 84 years old is a burden I do not have the strength or the interest to carry. So I made a decision, not for Cassidy's sake but for mine, to let it go. To put it down. To stop carrying it. That is not the same as forgetting and it is not the same as pretending it did not happen. It is just choosing to not let it take up any more of my remaining time on this earth than it already has. Randall and Cassidy are still married as of right now. I do not know what the future holds for them. I see Randall regularly now and he seems to be navigating things in his own way and I trust him to do that because he is a grown man. And my job is not to manage his life but to love him through it. Cassidy and I are not close and we may never be close and that is simply the reality of the situation. What matters to me is that my son knows he is loved. What matters to me is that the door is open and the light is on. I think about what I want you to take from this story and I think it is this. Love is not about winning. It is not about being right. It is not about proving your point or waiting for the person who hurt you to come crawling back. Love is about showing up anyway. It is about keeping the door open when everything in you wants to slam it shut. It is about choosing your child over your pride and choosing forgiveness over bitterness, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. I am 84 years old and I have lived long enough to know that life is short and complicated and full of people doing their best and their worst in equal measure. I have loved and lost and been hurt and been blessed and through all of it the thing that has held me together is the same thing that brought Randall back to my kitchen table on that October afternoon. Love. Just love. Plain and patient and stubborn as an old woman in a burgundy dress who refuses to give up on her child. If you are out there listening to this and you are going through something like what I went through, I want you to know that it can get better. Hold on. Keep the door open. Keep the light on. Your child will find their way back. They always do. And if you love your grandma the way I know you do, make sure she knows it today. Call her. Visit her. Sit at her table and let her feed you and just be with her because one day that table will be empty, and you will wish you had sat there more. Thank you for listening to this old woman today. You have been so kind to stay with me through this whole story, and I appreciate every one of you more than you know. Tell me where you are from in the comments down below because I love knowing where my people are. And if this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe and share it with your friends because you never know who out there needs to hear something like this today. God bless every one of you.